all, my name is Shelby Hartman. I'm DoubleBlind's co-founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're talking all things shrooms. But before we do, I just want to remind you to subscribe and turn on your notifications if you never want to miss a video from us. So if you've been following DoubleBlind for a while, then you know we talk a lot about shrooms, and we have a lot of videos on them, on microdosing, growing, large dose journeys, and beyond. But if you want an encyclopedic knowledge on shrooms, where do you begin? Let's get into it. Typically, when I think about shrooms, I divide my knowledge about them into a few different buckets. The types of shrooms, which we have a separate video on, how to access shrooms, i.e. growing them, buying them, foraging for them, how to take shrooms in small and large doses, how to make sense of a shroom trip once it's over, and how to combine shrooms with other drugs, if that's something that you feel called to do. Let's start with shroom types. As mentioned, we have a whole video just on shroom types, but I like to start here because most people don't know to. Most people, when they feel called to do shrooms for the first time, are just looking for shrooms, and they literally don't know to ask who they're buying from, what type they are. At least I didn't. I remember when I was a freshman in college and I didn't even know what shrooms were, and I did not know what I was getting myself into. And it was just like someone got shrooms from someone in our dorm and we took them, and that was the beginning and end of the discussion. So let's just start with the basics. Typically, when someone talks about shrooms, sorry if you know this already, we'll get into some more nuance in a moment, but they're talking about whole dried mushrooms that contain psilocybin, the most well-known psychoactive component in psychedelic mushrooms. And there are more than 180 different kinds, and within that, lots of varieties. So I've said this in other videos, but I feel like it's important to say it again. We see a lot of what has happened in the early days of cannabis happening in shrooms as well with marketing. So I just encourage people to be critical about what they're getting and what the packaging is saying and what the person you're buying them from is saying, especially if you're buying like a chocolate or something that isn't just whole psilocybin mushrooms. When spore shopping, it's always helpful to first look for the Latin name, which will usually be Psilocybe cubensis, which is the most commonly cultivated magic mushroom. So people usually want to know, how easy is it to cultivate and how potent is it? And realistically, Psilocybe cubensis are the most common to cultivate, but potency is tricky. Until very recently, we didn't know much about potency between strains. Yeah, you go on Reddit and Shroomery and people will be like, oh my God, this strain is so crazy, yada, 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 yada. But like, there wasn't actually any data to back it up, and there still is very little. It just started to change in April of 2021 when Oakland Hyphae, which is an incredible community that was started by a friend of ours at DoubleBlind named Reggie, put together the first psilocybin cup. And basically what the psilocybin cup did is that they had a bunch of different people in the community submit different psilocybin strains. Over 60 strains were supplied by growers, and the findings were relatively preliminary, but their methods were strong and add important data to back up all of the this strain is so crazy, or this strain is light and makes me feel like I want to dance. Again, be critical, folks. Across all the strains submitted, psilocybin content ranged from as low as 0.14% up to 2.26% dry weight in the winning tidal wave strain grown by Magic Myco. The point is, you just don't know how strong a strain is based upon the stories that you hear online about it. And we recommend as always that you start low and go slow, which basically means just, yes, ask the person that you're buying them from, but also try a little bit and see how that feels. Because at the risk of stating the obvious, you can always take more, but you cannot take less. And, you know, if you're interested in more tips and tricks on how to journey, or you had a journey that was really profound and now you're looking to integrate it, then just know that we have a lot of resources at DoubleBlind, and we have a community. It's a monthly membership program where you get access to experts, integration circles, breathwork, cannabis ceremonies, and the whole point of this offering is, you know, psychedelics can be intimidating and they can bring a lot of challenging content to the surface. And we really want to be here to support people on their journeys. And also, you know, shameless plug, but the proceeds from the membership do go to make videos like this possible, as well as our beautiful print magazine. So if you want to support our work, then that's a great way to do that. So you've done some research, you've read some guides on DoubleBlind about different species and strains, you've talked to the guy you bought from, or you've grown your own, or you foraged, and you're sure you don't have a fatal lookalike, you're sure you have what you think you have. And now, it's time to take the shrooms. So the average shroom trip lasts 4 to 6 hours, and shrooms take about 10 minutes to 60 minutes to kick in. You're gonna wanna do more research before you take shrooms on what to expect and sort of the arc of the shroom experience. What we always say to folks is do your homework. Really, because you just want to know what to expect and what's kind of considered normal before you take the shrooms, so that you're not in the middle of the experience as it's unfolding and feeling nauseous or feeling paranoid that the trip is never going to end and trying to figure it out at that time. Really, it's like you've already kind of read online that or heard from DoubleBlind that nausea is something that can happen on the come up. You already are aware of the fact that shrooms can, and all classic psychedelics really, can distort your sense of space and time. So you followed best practices like written down what time you started tripping so that 3 or 4 hours in, you can look at the clock and go, oh my God, I know it's felt like an eternity, but actually it's been 4 hours, which means I should be coming down soon. Just really kind of understanding what to expect, and also knowing that what to expect is the unexpected, right? That there is always going to be an element of uncertainty, unknown, when embarking on a psychedelic journey. It's really a journey. Part of signing up for a psychedelic experience is signing up for taking the ride and just being curious as to whatever it is that emerges. Something else you're going to want to think about before you take the shrooms is methods for taking the shrooms, which, we have videos on how to make shroom tea and how to lemon tech, and we have an article on how to make shroom chocolates, and we have actually a whole class on cooking with shrooms if you want to do really fancy stuff like psilocybin risotto and have a dinner party. That's extra, but we really do teach people how to do that. But, just naming that there are a lot of different ways to take shrooms, and that, you can just eat them, and a lot of people do, but they don't taste wonderful, and also eating them whole can increase the chances of nausea. So if you're concerned about that, then, grinding them up, putting them in tea, might be a better way to go. Or, cooking, making a recipe that incorporates ginger. The mycologists that we work with, Dr. Kay Mandrake and Virginia Hayes, also have a whole book with recipes, and they recommend ginger for folks that are concerned about nausea. Risks is another thing that a lot of people, ask us about. Specifically, people want to know about contraindications and if it's safe to trip if you're on an SSRI, an SNRI, or some other classic psychedelic. And I'm just going to say that's an area that we're not going to really touch at DoubleBlind. We're not going to get into specific individualized medical advice for people, but we do have sort of general guides on the website about what is known about combining psychedelics and SSRIs. Unfortunately, we are in a moment right now, you might have already experienced this, where whether your doctor is or is not willing to talk to you about a psychedelic is going to be very dependent on the doctor and, frankly, where they kind of sit on the ideological spectrum. Some doctors are totally hip to the fact that, we're in this psychedelic renaissance, and that legitimate institutions like NYU and Johns Hopkins are investigating psilocybin for conditions like major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression, and are going to be happy to sit down and talk with you about it. I actually have a friend who recently went to Kaiser, and Kaiser, believe it or not, has a contraindication database that they pulled up, and they actually were able to tell him if psilocybin was contraindicated based on the other meds he was on. So I was really surprised by that. So some doctors are willing to talk about this. Others are just going to be like, sorry, Psychedelics are illegal. I don't know anything about that. But generally speaking, we will say that psilocybin mushrooms have shown a very high safety profile for people who are considered healthy normals in double-blind randomized clinical trials. This essentially means, someone who doesn't have any kind of acute medical conditions like a heart problem or something like that. If you do have a history of mental health, specifically trauma personally or in your family, psychosis, bipolar, schizophrenia, etc., we're going to highly, highly, highly recommend that you engage a psychedelic integration therapist or someone who really has familiarity with psychedelics to help you before you embark on a psychedelic journey, to help you decide if this is truly the right thing for you, and if so, to help you prepare properly. We also have a class on microdosing, which walks you through all the protocols, how to pick the right substance for you, how to prepare, how to set an intention, how to track your microdosing journey. But I will say generally, in case you don't know, that microdosing is 1/10 to 1/20th of a dose of a classic psychedelic like mushrooms or LSD. And the two most common protocols for microdosing are the Fadiman protocol and the Stamets protocol. The Fadiman protocol is named for Jim Fadiman, who is often considered kind of the microdosing pioneer of the psychedelic renaissance. And he recommends doing a microdose on days 1 and 2 and then taking day 3 off. Paul Stamets, famed mycologist, is of course the one who popularized the Stamets protocol. He recommends 5 days on, 2 days off, or 4 days on, 3 days off. There's a lot more to be said about microdosing, but generally I'll just say that if you're beginning to embark on a journey with psychedelics and something that is emerging for you is a lot of fear, right? Like you kind of feel stuck in your life for whatever reason and you really want to try a psychedelic, but you don't have someone to trip sit for you, or you're just afraid, or you're reluctant for whatever reason, then starting with a microdose can be a really beautiful way to sort of work through some of that fear and to cultivate a relationship with the substance, right? Start low and go slow. You can always take more, you can never take less. Sorry to be a broken record, but gotta say it. Another piece that we're going to really encourage people to think about as they're learning about shrooms and thinking about embarking more deeply on a psychedelic journey is integration. Integration is essentially the period after the psychedelic experience where you are making sense of what came up for you and you are integrating those lessons into your life. And we often say in the psychedelic experience that integration is as important, if not more important, than the psychedelic experience itself. So if you do shrooms or LSD or DMT or ayahuasca or 2CB or MDMA, the list goes on, and you realize, I'm not sleeping enough, whatever the realization is, right? And then, and you have that experience on Saturday or Sunday, and then Monday you just go back to work and it's kids or it's your partner and it's all these things, right? And you don't actually take a moment to stop and think about, oh, I realized I need to sleep more. How am I going to restructure my life in order to do that? Then you're not going to be getting as much as you could. I'm not going to say you're not going to get anything out of the psychedelic experience, but you're not going to get as much as you could out of it. And so one of the biggest components here is, as with all things, when you're trying to change habits, support and community, right? Like, don't do this alone. Don't do this alone. And I know that sometimes it feels tricky, right? If you're living somewhere where you don't know other people that are doing shrooms, or there's just no one in your life that you necessarily want to do shrooms with. But having that support system so that, you can talk to people before the experience and afterwards you have, a place to land and people to talk to about the experience is really important. And there are psychedelic societies and communities all over the world. So we recommend you checking out our friends at the Global Psychedelic Society. You can Google that, and they have a database of communities that are doing gatherings all across the United States. And DoubleBlind also actually has a really beautiful online community. We have a monthly membership where all the proceeds go to, make videos like this possible, but also it's just like I mean, of course I'm biased, but I just think the gatherings are so beautiful. We've brought in really amazing resident facilitators to help with integration, breath work, cannabis ceremonies, all kinds of gatherings that will help you process what you're going through with other people. Okay, you've gotten this far in the video. You're like, I'm sold. I want to do shrooms. Where do you get them? So unfortunately, you know, we can do a lot for people at DoubleBlind, and we do our best. You know, we can support people before and after their psychedelic experiences. We can provide them with information on dosage. What we can't do is provide them with the drug, because the drugs are federally illegal. But there are a few ways that you can access shrooms. So firstly, at the risk of stating the obvious, you can just buy them if you find someone to buy them from. And there is a growing underground market, particularly in places where shrooms are decriminalized. And there's now more than a dozen cities where that's the case. And there's even some companies that are delivering shrooms to people's houses and stuff. We have an article called "You Can Now Buy Shrooms Online" on DoubleBlind, which is talking about kind of this booming underground market and some of the brands that are popping up in decriminalized jurisdictions. You can also forage for them, and we've done workshops on foraging on DoubleBlind. But again, I just want to remind you to be really careful to not take a shroom unless you are sure that you know what it is, because there are actually fatal lookalikes. And you can grow your own. You know, and a lot of people choose to do that, and it's a really beautiful way to cultivate a deeper relationship with fungi. To actually take the fungi that you have grown yourself is just like, it's an incredible experience. If you've ever grown a tomato or grown some herbs in your garden and cooked with them, you can imagine that, but like times in terms of how rewarded you're gonna feel. Lastly, something that we cover at DoubleBlind when it comes to taking shrooms is something we refer to as flipping, which is combining shrooms with other drugs. Yes, I did. There's 3 types of flipping that are most common. There's other kinds, but one is Jedi flipping. That's shrooms, MDMA, and acid. There's hippie flipping, which is MDMA and mushrooms. And there's candy flipping, which is acid and Molly. Okay, so disclaimer. Again, not recommending you do or don't do anything, because I'm not a doctor and I don't know you. But also, if you don't have experience on psychedelics, I would not recommend starting out by combining psychedelics, because it's typically going to be a more intense experience than just doing these substances individually. As you can imagine, there's basically no data on this, although interestingly, there was one small study that came out showing that candy flipping, combining acid and Molly, can make the acid experience more tolerable. And I'll just speak, you know, clinical trial of one over here, that my experience has been that taking a small amount of MDMA with shrooms can actually kind of take the edge off. MDMA is a heart opener, right? It's not to say that you can't feel sad or feel grief on MDMA. You certainly can, but it's not known for kind of sending people into the same sort of like dark experiences that mushrooms can. Again, I'm going to be careful not to demonize like sort of the dark side of psychedelics when they're taken in a supportive environment, because a lot of times those challenging experiences are the most cathartic ones. That being said, you know, some people do report, and it's been my experience, that taking a little bit of MDMA and mushrooms can kind of take the edge off of the mushroom experience. Lastly, I just want to say something that we're really committed to talking about and covering at DoubleBlind is something we refer to in the psychedelic community as Indigenous stewardship or reciprocity. So we just want to remember when we're engaging with mushrooms that they are a sacred being that has been taken for thousands of years, right, all around the world. And there are communities, specifically in Mexico, that are working to preserve the traditional knowledge and ceremonial use around mushrooms. One of them is a nonprofit called Esperanza Mazateca. We also encourage you to check out the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, which is a project of Shacruna, a nonprofit that does a lot to support these groups. We at DoubleBlind often say that we don't create a hierarchy of set and setting, right? So we're not going to tell you that, you know, you shouldn't take a little bit of mushrooms and hike, or you shouldn't take mushrooms at a festival. but we do want to encourage you, regardless of how you engage with these substances, to understand that they're sacred and to understand that they can bring all kinds of things to the surface that you weren't necessarily anticipating. So for more videos like this, check out our YouTube channel, and until next time.